Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Dmitri Trenin, the head of the Carnegie Moscow Center in Moscow, and Fred Weir, the Russia correspondent of the Christian Science Monitor, also in Moscow. Gentlemen, welcome to the Print Debates.
Thank you very much. Glad to be on the program.
And today we are discussing why and how Russia is in a state of flux. We've seen on Saturday afternoon in Moscow big demonstrations protesting the detention and the imprisonment of the dissident activist Alexei Navalny. Why Russia and the US have been at loggerheads for the past several months, and now there is a new Joe Biden administration. We will also talk about Russia-China relations, and hopefully I will also ask you both about the India-Russia tie. But first of all, Fred, if you can tell me a little bit about the demonstrations in Moscow on Saturday evening. How many people arrested? Who is Alexei Navalny in the first place?
Well, huge question. There were demonstrations all over the country. I think 85 cities. Some of them were awfully small. The one in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Novosibirsk, places like that were really large. And they have reasons to be outraged. It's just there aren't really enough of them to tip the scales, I think. But the story of Navalny is a serious one. He started as an anti-corruption blogger. He developed his reputation. He's clearly very ambitious and very talented. If you've seen his videos, his corruption videos, they're very professionally done. He has a theatrical flair for producing them, and he obviously gets inside information about leading Russians, people who are officials who clearly living far beyond their stated means.
Mr. Trenin, let me ask you, these demonstrations that took place, and as Fred described it, he is a challenge, but he's not that big a deal. So why is it that the Russian leadership seems to be so affected by this? I mean, why pick up 2,500, 3,000 people? If they're protesting peacefully in Pushkin Square in Moscow and across the country, why not just let them protest and let them vent steam?
Well, I think that, this demonstration on Saturday was not huge, but that was the biggest event of this kind in 4 years. So some sort of a lull has been broken. Mm-hmm. Second, Navalny has been an increasing challenge to the authorities. And what I think should disturb the peace of mind in the Kremlin is that Navalny and his supporters are winning over the youth. And they are about to take up the initiative. Last year started with Putin announcing government and constitutional changes. And throughout the year, he was setting the agenda. Right. And he was winning. He was winning the constitutional vote. He was winning, well, he meaning the system, the Kremlin, if you like. Right. The regional elections, and it looked like, and they were dealing with a pandemic far better than a lot of people thought they would. And it looked like it was a very good year for them. Now, this year is starting on the back foot for them. Uh-huh. And there is, I think, a fear that it is Navalny and his supporters and those who support those supporters that can try to seize the initiative. And we have a Duma election in September of this year. All that is happening within, I would say, a covert political transition process that has not been announced, but it's going on. So there are people within the system, within the regime, if you like, who are competing among themselves, and Putin is the only one who actually manages to discipline them. Navalny could be used by this group against that group, the result being turmoil. So right. Actually, if you sit in the Kremlin, you never underestimate the kind of surprise that your people can come up with. and you never take stability for granted. It's always pretty fragile.
Yeah. So Fred, Mr. Putin has been sitting in the Kremlin or most of the last 22 years. He became president in 99. He was prime minister in the middle for 4 years, but then he's back again as president. Now you have been covering Russia for the last, 30, 35 years. How would you compare what's been happening overnight over the last several months with protests around Navalny? Compare this with, say, 91 when the Soviet Union broke up, or 93 when Boris Yeltsin's army, or the army that was loyal to Yeltsin, bombed the parliament. Does this compare in any way?
Well, it's all part of the same continuum. But one of the things that I spend a lot of my time trying to explain to my American audience is that Russia today is not the Soviet Union. It's in many ways a completely different planet. There's been a tremendous amount of what you could refer to as normalization that's taken place in Russian society. Even politics are quite unlike the Soviet variety, or the turmoil of the 1990s, which was a social catastrophe and politically volatile. That went away to a large degree, and people now they can live their private lives. They own property. They travel abroad. They read whatever they want. Watch a spectrum of things on TV that most of which would have been banned in the Soviet Union. That's what I mean by normalization. But this business with Navalny points to something that is distinctly abnormal at the heart of the system. And I think there is an unease that especially educated Russians feel about the type of government they have. I think it lacks full democratic legitimacy. Everybody knows the stage managing and shenanigans that go on to perpetuate the system, and everybody is aware of the arbitrary behavior of bureaucrats. It's better. Even there's been a surprising amount of normalization, and I do.
Mr. Trenin, what is remarkable for me, an Indian sitting in Delhi, is that Russia's population, Fred talked about an educated population, but Russia's population is largely educated and very aware, a very politically aware population. So, the 90s that Fred referred to, a time of social turmoil, now and Yeltsin gives way to President Putin, to Vladimir Putin, who then takes charge. So is it that Russia likes these strong men to take charge and to lead the country on their behalf, and therefore it's okay that the country sort of recovers itself, does very well economically, but politically there may be some gaps, but that's fine?
Well, let me tell you this. There are some people who long for a Western-style modern model of government, so that every 4, 6, 5 years there's a change of command, and then no one stays longer than, let's say, 10 years, and there are parties that change themselves, that always alternate in power,
right?
In parliament and stuff like that. But for the large majority of people in Russia is not a country of rich people, or even of people of substantial or even decent levels of income. A lot of Russian people live, let's say, on very meager means. And for those people, the most important rights that they want the government to protect and promote are their socioeconomic rights. So the majority of Russian people wouldn't mind someone staying in power for a very long time, provided that the government delivers. Now, the problem in Russia is that over the last decade, there has been economic stagnation. And a lot of people's incomes have been going down, let's say 10%, 4% over a couple of years. And that is something that creates a pretty fertile ground for discontent. Now, when these same people look at the elites in Russia, starting from a very low level, let's say your town mayor, and all the way up, and look at Fred was very generous when he said that people in government were living somewhat above their stated salaries. Now, the problem in Russia is that whereas in some other countries, you get rich before you join the government, and after you leave the government, in Russia, you become rich, filthy rich, while you stay in government, because you stay in government. So you have a mayor of a fairly small town who builds, in plain view, he builds a mansion for himself that's worth millions and millions of dollars. Everyone sees that.
Which small town are you referring to?
Well, the Serpukhov. It's 100 kilometers south of Moscow. The guy's I think he's already been sentenced to a long prison term. But he's just an emblem. There are many like him. Look at how government tenders for contracts are dealt with. Who gets very rich contracts from the government? Look at all these things, and you see the system that essentially is tilted outrageously in favor of those who are in power. Outrageously. And ordinary people see all that, and they are not happy. They would be happy with Putin staying in power for 100 years, provided that things were moving up and up, and all boats would be rising. But when some boats rise to the sky and others others sink, actually, then people become discontent.
This is a remarkable time, Fred, isn't it? An era of strongmen that we in the press, in the media talk about a lot. You know, you have President Putin in Moscow. Until recently, you had Trump in America. You have the Turkey Prime Minister, the President. You have Prime Minister Modi in India. Xi Jinping, how can I forget Xi Jinping in China? You know, all very strong and very powerful leaders. But do you think, Fred, so two questions. One is that do journalists yourself or do Russian journalists ask the leadership, you know, how come the president is staying in power for so long, for more than...
Okay, so I don't think that all these strong men are comparable. I think we're every country is a different story, and there are different reasons why things are coming unstuck in the world generally. In Russia, Putin has created a regime that is pretty much ideology free. I mean, okay, there's Russian Orthodox Christianity and traditional values, and they talk that up, but it's nothing comparable to the Soviet era when they had Marxism, Leninism, and it was a universal doctrine that purported to be good for everybody. I don't think that Russia has anything like that anymore, and Putin has, and they do want to maybe even emulate that, the Chinese success, but I'm not sure it's comparable to what you've got in India, and certainly not to the United States, where political divisions are tearing things apart, and Trump, Trump is gone now, but he was never much of a strong man. So the general dynamic in relations between Russia and the United States, which Dmitri is a big expert on, and I think you should ask him this question, but it is downward, and it's being driven by a lot of factors, but I think it's mainly in the United States. Russia is being built up way, way beyond any kind of real challenge it poses for domestic reasons. It's just a condition.
So, Dmitri, let me ask you this question about the US-Russia relationship. Do you think it will improve under Joe Biden? Do you think that Joe Biden will offer an olive branch to the Chinese until recently, when Trump was in power. We saw how both the US and China were at loggerheads. And now, do you think things will change, or do you think that the Russia-China relationship will also impact on the US-Russia relationship?
Well, I think that in terms of US-China relations, style will obviously change. It has already changed. But the substance of the US policy, I don't think will change. I believe that the United States will continue to see China as the biggest challenge to the US position in the world. And this challenge is only growing bigger over time. So the United States, while avoiding some steps that would hurt the US more than it would hurt China, in that sense, the policy may be smarter in some ways. At least people will try to make it smarter, trying to put pressure on China without paying the cost in the United States for that. But otherwise, I think that the policy will continue to be that of confrontation, and even some new statements, very recent statements from Washington suggest that the United States may even increase its pressure on China. For example, we just heard that the United States has confirmed to Japan that if need be, it would defend the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, something that the previous administrations had not been very clear on.
Right.
So that's a sign that, and then of course the Biden administration has come with the idea of uniting democracies against the autocracies, and the autocracies / kleptocracies / oligarchical regimes, and you can subsume both China and Russia and a couple of other places under this heading, will bear the brunt of America's new, much more ideologized, I don't know, it's a horrible world, much more ideology-driven, I think, approach that the Biden administration will be offering to the world. So I think that relations with between China and the United States will continue to be confrontational, and the dangers that this kind of relations are fraught with will continue to rise.
But what about the Russia-China relationship? That is so close these days. Will that have an impact on the US-Russia tie, do you think, Mr. Trenin?
No, I think that the US policy toward China and Russia, which is putting pressure on both countries, could have the unintended, or let's say ignored, effect of pushing China and Russia closer together.
Okay.
Against the United States. Should the United States continue, I think it will continue the policy of putting pressure on Beijing and Moscow at the same time. But here's a trick. Russia's integration into the West in the 90s and the early 2000s, that attempt founded on Russia's refusal to accept US leadership and be just an associate of the Western system, right?
Right.
What applies to the United States applies to any other great power or major power that pretends to hegemony in the world. And that certainly applies to China. Should China seek to impose itself on Russia, then I think there will be a pushback. I'm absolutely certain of that. I don't think that Russia will follow China and become just an add-on, a vassal, or however you want to call it, become what Europe is to the United States, in other words, or Japan is to the United States. I don't think it's going to happen. So Russia, although it is much weaker than China in some respects, some very important respects, such as economic power, technological powers, financial power, and demographics, and I can continue.
Right.
It would still refuse to be to fold into the Chinese sphere of whatever you call it, Pax Sinica we call it. Mm-hmm. So Russia will not join Pax Sinica. It doesn't matter that Russia will be progressively more dependent on China. I think since Russia's ties with Europe are very much broken or undermined, Russia has to rely more on China than it would want to, than it would make sense for Russia. But there's no other choice.
Do you agree with this, Fred, with Mr. Trenin's assessment?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. I to some extent, I think Putin uses the relationship with China, and it's. I think they meet once or twice a year. I mean, at the top level, they have a really solid relationship. But I think he uses it mainly to give the middle finger to the West. There is a statement that we don't need you. We've got China. That gives a lot of satisfaction there. But indeed, there is an acceleration of relations with China.
But does he give a middle finger to China on any issues?
No, they don't do that. They don't. If you take any of the controversies that come up in the West, like the coronavirus and how China was not forthcoming at the beginning, and China foisted this virus on the world, Russia never joined in any of that.
Right.
No, I mean, they stay away from saying anything bad about China. I think they do it in great detail, like the Dalai Lama cannot visit Russia anymore.
Yeah.
And that's to soothe the feelings of who.
Although he did visit Russia in the early 90s, Fred, and in fact,
yes,
met the Dalai Lama in Moscow.
Yes, I met him too, because my mother-in-law is a big India person.
Right.
And
yeah. But can I ask you, Mr. Trenin, I want to pick up on the China story. And you know that in India, China these days, because of its occupation of large territories in Ladakh, and how Indian and Chinese troops have been in not eyeball to eyeball, but in very close proximity for the last 8 months in the Himalayas, in the freezing winter. In Russia, how do you look at this India-China conflict that has that's facing us these last several months?
Virtually everyone looks at that with a lot of regret, with a lot of dismay, and they see it as a huge misfortune. In Russia, they regard India as an all-weather friend over the last 70 years, ever since India's independence. It's a unique relationship that Russia has with another major power that has never experienced any serious conflict. In fact, it's been a friendly relationship throughout. Now, the relationship with China has seen ups and downs, from Russia being the big brother to Soviet Union, that the historical name of Russia being the big brother to China, to having a border war between the Soviet Union and China. Now the relationship has finally reached a balanced, equilibrated state, which is a sine qua non for Russian security and economic prosperity. Now, when Russia sees China and India involved in a military clash, military conflict, and when Russia sees the political relationship going south between China and India, Russians are very much concerned. And the most they can do is try to facilitate some sort of a dialogue. Because for Russia, one way to win more equilibrium for the global system would be for non-Western powers, non-Western major powers, to rise and in a friendly environment, let's say among themselves, create an alternative to the global order, or to improve jointly the order so that it's not wholly or primarily tilted toward the West. And India and China were extremely important from that point of view.
What I'm trying to say, Mr. Trenin, is that of course it's not a black and white world, but if Russia doesn't choose more carefully, and perhaps we don't need to choose, but do you see that this conflict is driving India into a much closer relationship with the US?
Absolutely.
So does,
Absolutely.
does Russia
And
see
everyone,
that? Does Russia
everyone
see
in
that as
Russia
well?
sees that. No, that's clear. But our Indian friends, I think, need to realize that relations with China, the level that they have reached, a relationship that is call it strategic partnership, call it as I do entente. This relationship relieves the Russian leadership of a tremendous headache of a hostile China. A hostile China was always a big headache for the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union had to wage two Cold Wars against the United States and against China for decades. Now we are spared that predicament. So nothing that Russia will do will impair the relationship with China. Russia doesn't have, the formula for Russian-Chinese relations is like this. We will never be against each other, but we will not always have to be with each other. Mm-hmm. Which means that India-China relationship is India-China relationship. Russia can offer its services as a facilitator, as a friend of both, to make sure that these friends meet and thrash out their differences, but Russia cannot choose and will not choose. Okay. It will try to preserve. Now, anything in politics has a price. Mm-hmm. And the price to be paid in this case is for India to seek closer relationship with the United States. Now, the United States is seeing India as a very useful element in its overall policy of containing China, because for the United States, it's the China challenge that threatens to put the United States on #2 position in the world, something unthinkable for Americans. And India, as well as Japan, as well as Vietnam, as well as some other countries, are instrumental in the global policy of the United States. Well, this is the reality. And, we live in a world of realities. Absolutely. We cannot invent them.
Yeah. Fred, you have the last word. You've been covering not just Russia, but also the India-Russia relationship for the last several decades. How do you see it unfold? And especially in terms of the India-China conflict that we were just talking about.
Yes, well, that is the defining thing. There was a lot of optimistic talk. I remember, and you remember maybe 20 years ago, about a strategic triangle between Russia, India, and China. I think it was even former Prime Minister Primakov who floated that idea. Right. And of course, it was probably mostly wishful thinking even then, but it has deteriorated now. We're looking at a world in which there are many powers. It's a multipolar world, and there is increasingly less order in it. I think that one of the features that we have to consider is that the United States is in serious crisis and long-term decline. That's a factor that affects everything, including the size of demonstrations in Moscow on any given day. I think that the spectacle that we're witnessing in the United States has a lot of repercussions on many levels. But there too, if you want to get close to the United States, now it's not the beneficial and naturally convenient thing that it might have been 30 years ago, or even inevitable thing. It's quite different, and the world is fragmenting. So India has a lot of choices to make. I know that well, on the official level, relations are good, and they meet and they have these positive statements. I know that India is drifting away from the former pro-Russian attitude that they always had. I know many of my Indian friends are much more skeptical of Russia, and I appear on Indian TV a lot, and newscasters seem to take a very anti-Russian tone. I mean, even from my point of view. So that's happening.
Yeah, I think the economic relationship could have helped tide over, if you like, political differences. And while both countries try for that, but it hasn't really happened, as you've said. But Dmitri Trenin, Fred Weir, thank you for this fascinating conversation. We will continue to watch here in India the Alexei Navalny story, demonstrations, whether they continue or not, and President Putin, this very strong man, a leader that we've seen who's restored Russia to its former glory, if you like, after the turmoil of the 90s that Fred, you and me were both witness to firsthand, and I'm sure you too, Mr. Trenin. But it's a fascinating country, Russia. We will continue to see what's happening and how this story unfolds. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Fred, it was great to see you again.